I just spent the past day marking down every rookie ADP that you had since the year 2014, following it up with what their ADP was the following June, following it up with what their ADP was going into their third season. This gives us so much valuable information that we can dive into, looking at the expected hit rates, both for running back, wide receiver, what you have from running backs that were ranked highly coming out versus running backs that were ranked low. We can look at mid-round wide receivers, late-round wide receivers, early-round wide receivers, and we can try to figure out exactly where you should be trying to draft running back versus wide receiver in your rookie drafts based off historical data. Now, this ADP going back to 2014, sadly, it's not on flogfantasy.com. Instead, we pulled it from DLF. Ryan McDowell has been collecting this for pretty much ever now. Now, we posted all this over on the site. Now, I will say, if you are looking at anybody that has an ADP of 200 or beyond, we just put 200 because if you're sitting there with an ADP of 200, 250, 300, it's all about the same. That player in a one quarterback league, if your ADP is 220, you're worthless, right? So from a conditioning formatting perspective, it made it look a lot better. It's a lot easier to follow if you were able to just go through and able to see it at 200 and knowing the player is worthless. But let's dive into running backs. I want to specifically look at expected hit rates for early round RBs. So going back to the year 2014, there were 3 running backs that ended up getting drafted inside the top 12 picks of Dynasty startup drafts their rookie seasons. Those guys were Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, as well as Ezekiel Elliott. And those 3 players, yeah, they turned out to be very, very good. Bijan right now is a 7th in ADP. Saquon Barkley by the third season was number 1 in Dynasty ADP. Ezekiel Elliott was number 4. So we see that, yeah, those very few once in a blue moon prospects at the running back position that are immediately valued as top end studs. Yeah, go ahead, buy the hype, draft them everywhere you can. Really, it's never not going to work out. Now, expanding this view and instead looking at the guys that went in the top 2 rounds of Dynasty startup drafts, here it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. You have Breece Hall, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Najee Harris, Leonard Fournette, Todd Gurley, as well as J.K. Dobbins. If you're looking at this list of running backs, there was a pretty big bust on here. Clyde Edwards-Helaire went from being the 13th overall guy his rookie season down to the 74th. So among, these 12 or so players that were top 2 round startup picks, you had one big bust in CEH. You had a couple other guys that, were a tad bit disappointing. Najee Harris, if you sold high on him after year 1, you made out like a bandit. But if you held on to him, he went from 19 his rookie season down to 35 going into year 3. Leonard Fournette went from 19 his rookie season down to 33 in year 3. J.K. Dobbins went from 24 to 35. So maybe make the argument that those guys lost a little bit of value. And I understand we can also say, oh, well, Dobbins never really did anything, so maybe he shouldn't have been valued there. I'm not going to make that argument one way or another. I think once you introduce that, it does cloud the information so damn much because we can say, okay, well, maybe he didn't hit in years 4, 5, 6, but if you're able to sell him after year 2 for a massive profit, if you're able to sell him after year 3 for a massive profit, it's pretty much a hit in your rookie draft. Now, going over and let's look at more so the regular early to mid round 1 running backs. Because if you were on that list where you're Leonard Fournette, Najee, Gibbs, Taylor, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Breece Hall, those were the who-who. Those were guys that were valued so damn high coming out of school. This range of players is going to be the list of Melvin Gordon, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Cam Akers, Kenneth Walker, CMC, Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift, Darius Geis, Javonte. We'll run it all the way down to about, let's call it, say, the 40s. If you're looking at Melvin Gordon through Rashad Penny here, these are going to be the running backs that are going about at the 103 or the 104 in your rookie draft. So they're solid early round 1 options, but not necessarily elite level prospects. And you'll see that these guys, more times than not, are phenomenal investments. You had a couple busts here. Darius Geis stands out. Rashad Penny stands out. Javonte Williams went from 34 down to 48. Kenneth Walker stayed the same. Ultimately, if you are drafting any running back here, take them early on. If that guy has an ADP of the 102, ADP of the 103, ADP of the 104, he is such a safe investment to hold on to his dynasty fantasy football value through year 1, through year 2, and at least going into year 3. I think a big reason for this is that running back, so much of the position is going to be dictated not necessarily just based off of talent. A lot of this is dictated based off of raw opportunity. If a running back is perceived to be a great player coming out of college, if he goes very high in the NFL draft and then very high in your rookie draft, more times than not, that running back's going to have a pretty large role in year 1. And even if he's not a super talented back, I mean, he can still score fantasy points and he can still hold on to value. So it's a very safe investment 9 times out of 10 outside of those one-off busts. If you are looking at those players that are blue chips coming out at the running back position in particular, wide receiver is going to be a little bit different. Once we begin to get into, say, mid-round 1, this is going to be the Nick Chubb through about, we'll call it Kerryon Johnson range, the ADP of like 42 through 59. Here, you are going to introduce some pretty big busts. You have Royce Freeman, who by the time it's all said and done is not being drafted going into year 3. We can say the same thing with Bishop Sankey. TJ Yeldon was pretty much there as well. And here, these are going to be more so running backs that you're introducing that instead of going round 1 of the NFL draft, went in round 2, and maybe for one reason or another, dynasty owners decided to go through and hype these players up. Now, as we transition over to going late round 1 of rookie drafts, this is going to be like, say, 60 through about 90. You're looking at Carlos Hyde through about, actually even less than that. I would say 60 through about 81 to the James Cook range. Here, you're introducing more busts. You have Trey Sermon, Darrell Henderson, Samaje Perine, Kenneth Dixon, Keyshawn Vaughn. The expected hit rate for these players in late round 1 at the running back position in your rookie draft is dramatically lessened. We go over to round 2. This is going to be like the Zach Charbonnet all the way down to Paul Perkins range. You can see about half these running backs will not turn out to be anything. Now, every once in a while, yeah, you'll get Devonta Freeman coming out being a massive hit. You have Rachaad White, massive hit. David Johnson, massive hit. A.J. Dillon, pretty big hit from a value accruement standpoint. So it's not to say you shouldn't be drafting these running backs. You should just understand that the range of outcomes here means that they are going to be significantly less likely to go through and find success, such as those running backs in round 1. And then as we get to mid round 2 and beyond, this is where it is more likely than not your running back amounts to nothing. This is where you should say, okay, if I take a back and he turns into anything, I am freaking pumped. I mean, say starting at Joe Williams and then going all the way down to, I want to say the last like round 2 running backs that you had here are maybe say Ramondre Stevenson, or let's call it Zamir White at 150. So we're going to be looking at ADP 120 through 150. I mean, you have a few guys that hit. You have Kenyon Drake, James Conner, Marlon Mack, Jordan Howard, Antonio Gibson that have a considerable amount of value. Now to those guys with some value, it's not necessarily to say that they do anything with it, but once you get to the mid-second round of your rookie draft, the baseline expectation is you're taking Kalen Ballage and he's nothing, Anthony McFarland and he's nothing, Darrington Evans and he's absolutely nothing. And then round 3 and beyond here, where you're looking at, say, Joshua Kelly through Tony Pollard. 90% of these players are going to be nothing, ladies and gentlemen. 90% of them are Joshua Kelly, Mike Davis, Jonathan Williams, Jeremy McNichol, Storm Johnson, Tyler Irvin, Izzy, Chuba, Kenneth, Darwin Thompson, Cameron Artis-Payne. I know that we'll always remember, oh, okay, Aaron Jones was really good. That is true. Aaron Jones was really good. And then every once in a while, you have Kyron Williams. You have Austin Eckler, and you're not even going to see those players in this data because they weren't even going inside the top 200 startup picks, and they were more so undrafted options. Now, of course, if you expand the player pool to undrafted running backs as well, you will pick up an additional few hits, but at the same time, you're going to be adding almost infinitely more misses. So it just goes to show once we get into rounds 3 and 4, really, it's going to be a rare instance in where you're finding these running backs accruing a considerable amount of value going into year 3. Now, as we pull up wide receiver, you're going to see that there's almost a different story being told here with this position. And as I pull this stat up, I want to remind y'all, I put this Google sheet over on flogfantasy.com. If anybody's interested, we are going to have some other takeaways with this as well. I think you can have your own takeaways and you can cross-reference whatever we are putting out, of course. And yeah, on flogfantasy.com, you can find my Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings as well. All the rankings for pretty much everybody that you watch. So many Dynasty Rookie Draft Guides there as well. We have the Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide of Fantasy Stock Exchange, Dynasty Land Football, Dynasty Domain. Literally like hundreds of pages of information on this year's rookie class if y'all are interested. And yeah, all on flogfantasy.com. Get it all. Code FLOCK. We get you 30% off any sub. Plus code FLOCK. Yours truly will break down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team with a podcast. But moving over to wide receiver. Wide receiver is not as clear cut and dry as running back. And at running back, a lot of it comes down to, can you get the opportunity? Even if you're not a super talented back, as long as you're seeing raw volume, you can score fantasy football points and you can still accrue value. Wide receiver, not only do you need the opportunity to get on the football field, but you have to be talented enough to then draw separation and actually draw that target. It's not as simple as the coach calling in a play saying, yeah, we're going to need you to hand the ball off to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. No, it's, hey, I'm going to throw Laquan Treadwell out on the fields. If he's open, throw him the ball. If he's not, then obviously I'm not going to tell you to throw it in his direction. So here, wide receiver at the very top, you are seeing significantly more bust. I mean, we go through and look at the top 2 rounds here. I mean, there are only 4 players, and Laquan Treadwell's on this list. Corey Davis is on this list. Half of those guys in the top 2 round of startup drafts, they don't necessarily pan out. We go over to the other guys that go early round 1. Yes, we have some bona fide studs here. Yes, you are looking at Jamar Chase. I mean, lighting the world on fire. You have Brandon Cooks, who is a phenomenal option as well. You have CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson turning into top 10 assets in Dynasty. But at the same time, in early round 1 of Dynasty rookie drafts, you also have Kevin White, massive bust. You have, I don't want to throw JSN on here. He's going to be a video later in the week. I actually have some pretty big takeaways with JSN that we can talk about here. You have Devontae Parker losing value. Corey Coleman, massive bust. Treylon Burks, massive bust. Josh Doxson, massive bust. N'Keal Harry, massive bust. Nelson Aguilar, massive bust. These guys that are early to mid round 1 NFL draft picks, a wide receiver, they're not hitting like 100% of the time or 99% of the time like you saw from running back. And what's very interesting is we go away from those guys that had an ADP, say in the 30s, and we move on to the wide receivers that had an ADP in the 50s and 60s as rookies. And you'll see that these guys going in the 50s and 60s, their expected range of outcomes is pretty much about the same. It's not like the bust rate goes dramatically up. I mean, yes, you have your Dorial Green Beckham, you have your Jalen Reagor, you have your Sky Moore in this list, but you also have your other massive hits. You have your Odell Beckham Jr., your AJ Brown, your DK Metcalf, your Michael Thomas, your Justin Jefferson, your Chris Olave. If you were looking at the players that have massive hits versus turn into bust, the rates are about the same. If you are looking at early round 1 draft picks at the wide receiver position, specifically in Dynasty rookie drafts, versus mid round 1 draft picks, it's more so one big tier. Whereas if you were looking at that running back list, it is that consistent fall off until you hit the cliff and nobody's exciting at all anymore. Now we go over to, say, late round 1 in your rookie drafts. I know that maybe we're simplifying it down here a bit, but still, just stick with us. I mean, we can go through and we can look at the guys that were going, say, mid 70s, starting at like Cortland Sutton, all the way down to the players in the 90s, such as like Deebo Samuel, Juju, Will Fuller, McCole Hardman. And here you are going to see a significantly more bust and a lower ceiling overall. I mean, you have massive bust. You have Ruggs, Leonte Carew, Jalen Strong, Tyler Boyd, Philip Dorsett, Denzel Mims, Terrace Marshall. I mean, once we're getting to this late round 1, early round 2 range at wide receiver, yes, the bust rate's going to go up. No, we do not see the same level ceiling that we have from like the Justin Jefferson range either. Really, the only upside case that you have here is you have Juju commanding a ton of value. Allen Robinson, ton of value. T. Higgins sees a pretty nice spike. Michael Pittman sees a pretty nice spike. But overall, once you get into that late round 1, early round 2, the ceiling dramatically comes down for wide receiver while the floor comes down as well. You go into mid round 2 to late round 2, you kind of see the same thing here. And then we get over to round 3 and round 4. Now, this is what I really wanted to focus in on, is if we get to the late rounds at wide receiver versus running back, we go to the later rounds at running back, nobody hits. We have Aaron Jones. We can name some players that were like undrafted guys that came from nowhere that ended up being very good, like Austin Eckler. But like I said, we can't really include those guys in the data set if they weren't drafted in their dynasty rookie drafts. Then we can expand the player pool to literally an infinite amount of undrafted free agents at the running back position. And same thing at wide receiver, right? So we really want to stick it with the guys that were actually getting drafted inside the top 200 picks of dynasty startups their rookie year. We go over to wide receiver. You have guys coming from rounds 3 and 4 that are, I don't want to say hitting often, but getting a considerable amount of value. Like looking at these players that have an ADP of like, say 135 and beyond. Deontay Johnson hits. Tyler Lockett hits. Kenny Golladay. I know maybe he disappoints later on, but I mean, he got up to 36 in startups. Cooper Kupp. Carlos Henderson, I mean, for whatever reason, was valued highly. Chase Claypool was valued at one point. DJ Chark was valued at one point. Terry McLaurin, Jarvis Landry had a ton of value. Stephon Diggs, ton of value. Puka Nacua right now is one of the top assets in Dynasty. So we go through this, and what my takeaway from this data is if you're in your own rookie draft and you're in a spot where you can say, oh, okay, yes, I am early round 1. I know that Todd Gurley or Amari Cooper goes here consistently. Both of them are phenomenal prospects. I don't necessarily know which position we should be going with, blah, blah, blah. If you take this data, it tells you that if you have the opportunity to take an elite running back prospect versus an elite wide receiver prospect, you should probably be going with running back. However, as we get to rounds 2, 3, 4, what we're finding a lot of times with this data is if you have a wide receiver that you like there, you should probably be pulling the trigger on the wide receiver. Now, there are a couple different other interesting data points that we have here as well. And that is if you're looking at like, not necessarily a generational type prospect at wide receiver. I don't necessarily want to be looking at like Amari Cooper, Sammy Watkins, but instead looking at wide receivers that are going around like the 103, 104. A lot of times you're better off taking that pick, trading back, taking a wide receiver that's going to be going mid to late round 1 rather than early to mid round 1 and picking up additional assets. So maybe this year that's instead of taking, I don't know, you're in a 1 quarterback format, instead of taking Brian Thomas Jr. at the 105, maybe instead you trade back from the 105 to the 110. If you can pick up an additional 2025 first somehow, and all of a sudden, instead of taking Brian Thomas Jr., you take Adonai, you take Xavier, you take Franklin, and you pick up an additional first because what the data says is those wide receivers going in early to mid versus mid to late, the expected hit rate is about the same historically. Now, of course, there's not too much we can take away in terms of early rounds here in drafting a running back versus wide receiver, because if we pull up ADP right now, you are not going to have the opportunity to take any elite running back prospect. The running backs you're looking at are going to be round 2 options, round 3 options, round 4 options. This historical data says you're probably better off taking a wide receiver with that pick anyway. So, I mean, I think this is extremely useful data for future draft classes where running back versus wide receiver is more of a debate. Here, I think it goes to say, unless you have access to Marvin Harrison Jr., unless you have access to Malik Neighbors, Rome, if you're looking at anybody else, you're probably better off trading down a little bit at wide receiver, picking up an additional asset, taking someone at the end of the tier, kind of ignoring running back overall and slamming wide receivers through the later rounds as well. But I posted all this on flockfantasy.com if you're interested and you want to check it out a little more in depth. And of course, if you have not done so already, hit that like, subscribe if you play Dynasty. And if you're not a member of the Flock on flockfantasy.com, links in the description. Code FLOCK will get you 30% off any sub, plus yours truly breaking down your Dynasty fantasy football team in a podcast. But That's all I got for you. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day and hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.